All right, we've certainly hit the home stretch here as Georgia hosts Charlotte for the final regular season game of the year in Athens. Probably the last regular season game in Athens, or the last game in Athens. We'll see. We know after this there can only be one more, but I'm skeptical that will be the case. We're going to talk about that and a lot more. Stick around if you want me to lay out all of the SEC championship scenarios for you. It is pretty extensive, I'll say that. But Georgia will host Charlotte tomorrow morning. Well, tomorrow at about a little bit shy of 1 o'clock. The Dogs will take the field. I don't anticipate the first team offense or defense being out there for very long. This is a team that needs to kind of get a couple guys back healthy. C.J. Allen, Chauncey Bowens, both guys that Georgia would like to see play against Georgia Tech and beyond. You know, that Tech game is at minimum going to be a 10-1 Georgia against at worst a 9-2 Georgia Tech team. So my suspicion it will be both teams 10-1. So I would say this: when you're going to Red Zone this weekend, checking out everything, this could be your last weekend in Athens. Keep that in mind. And these weekends where Georgia's playing teams that are weaker, particularly later in the year, I think those are some of the best games that you can go to as a fan. You know, a week ago, as well as the Ole Miss game, the Alabama game, we've seen 3 of the home games this season where sort of, if you were a fan in the 90s, you're just priced out. I mean, if you grew up where I did, you may well be priced out. So I think that's something to consider with the Charlotte game, the Marshall game, and the Austin Peay game. Of course, the Kentucky game, a very solid win for Georgia at this time slot. Georgia's played pretty well so far in the early afternoon slot, the 12 o'clock start. So that was the Kentucky game and the Mississippi State game. I anticipate that they'll play well against Charlotte. I don't know if the focus will be there quite the same way that the other games, you know, that's the case. Make sure you're dropping by Red Zone on Clayton Street. You're going to go to the Arch, and then you're going to go north away from campus, 1 block, take a left, and you'll see the flags, and you'll see Scott and Mindy and their staff. They just do a really good job of helping you locate what you want. We're going to have some Christmas stuff coming up soon from them as well. You can check that out on Instagram, Facebook, and I'll have some of it here too. But there's a lot that will impact Georgia's postseason right now coming into this weekend. So Florida-Tennessee is a big game for that. Vanderbilt-Kentucky is a big game for that. And then next week, when Arkansas and Missouri play, those 3 games, if 2 of those 3 games wind up with Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky winning, that's it. Georgia will play in the SEC championship, irrelevant of the outcome of the Alabama-Texas A&M games on Black Friday and then the primetime Saturday night. The other scenario is, of course, that either Texas A&M or Alabama loses. They could get shuffled out. There are scenarios where Texas A&M does not play in the SEC championship. There are more scenarios where Alabama does not play in the SEC championship, comparatively speaking. There are scenarios if A&M loses, Alabama loses, and Ole Miss wins, that would be Georgia against Ole Miss in the SEC championship. If Alabama loses, Texas A&M wins, Georgia will play Texas A&M in the SEC championship. If A&M wins and Alabama wins, they will both play one another. And then there are scenarios with if Texas A&M loses and Alabama wins, Georgia will play Alabama in the SEC championship. So there are 4 different championship scenarios. The A&M, Alabama, Georgia A&M, Georgia Bama, and then Georgia Ole Miss. There's a lot of backdoor situations here. I don't do parlay betting. I actually really don't. I don't bet in sporting. I watch it hard. I will tell you that, but I don't bet it. And hitting a parlay of 3 teams winning games straight up, that's a tricky thing. So you can look at it one way or the other. Alabama and or there's a bunch of trap doors for Alabama. First, they got to win on the road as a 5-point favorite. They got to make sure that Vanderbilt wins, or that Missouri wins next week, or that Tennessee wins. So it gets kind of tricky. Tennessee and Vanderbilt. Tennessee's playing on the road, so that's a narrow line right there. And then A&M, for them, they're only a 2.5 point favorite at Texas. So Alabama's on the road, Tennessee is on the road, A&M and Alabama are on the road. In addition, Arkansas, Mizzou game, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that's at Arkansas. Yeah, it is. And then, the Swamp hosts that game. So, there's way too much wiggle room as it relates to Alabama not getting into the thing. On top of that, people will ask, well, how is it possible that Alabama would not go if they beat Georgia earlier in the year? Well, this all assumes, perhaps incorrectly, that State will lose the Egg Bowl to Ole Miss. That's not a certainty. But in a multi-team one-loss scenario, Alabama loses out to Georgia and Ole Miss every time. However, where Alabama does not lose out is when they are tied with Texas A&M with a loss. So that's how, if there's a 4-team where Alabama wins, A&M loses, Georgia's already played their games, and then Ole Miss wins, everybody's tied at 7-1. Everybody's not played everybody in there. And it doesn't matter if they do, because that game is immediately removed. And then you start looking at, it goes down to a conference winning percentage. And Texas A&M has played the weakest conference schedule of those teams. Ole Miss has played the second weakest. So that's how you would get that if those two teams tied. And then in a 3-way tie with Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Georgia, that's a scenario where both A&M and Alabama lose. Georgia and Ole Miss have played a more difficult conference schedule than Texas A&M. So that, in that scenario, Alabama would be knocked down to 6-2. They wouldn't be in the tiebreaker. So that's all of the scenarios. I think people should sort of prepare themselves to play in Atlanta not next weekend. Certainly next weekend, but the weekend after that as well. I don't think that's out of the question at all, and I think Georgia would probably be favored in that game, no matter who they played. Alabama, Texas A&M, Ole Miss. Ole Miss, they would certainly be favored. I would imagine they would be a very narrow favorite over Alabama, and maybe a 4-point favorite or something like that against Texas A&M. It wouldn't be, I don't know how, it would be tight with Texas A&M. It would be tight with Alabama. Georgia would be favored. I think the way I understand it right now, and if you look at different places, the only team that Georgia would not be favored by is Ohio State, favored over, I should say, and there would be a very narrow underdog there. So narrow to me means field goal or fewer. Anything for me 2 points and under. That's basically a coin flip game. You get a very narrow look at who should be favored. If you're a 2-point, favorite, you probably should win. You shouldn't certainly win. Once you get up to 6, once you get past 5.5. then one team should win. Doesn't always happen, but one team should win. And right now, Alabama at Auburn, I think that I pick Alabama. I'm going to pick Alabama to win that game. I think the concern that I have as it relates to Alabama going into that one is they don't run the ball at all. And Auburn will stop the run. Ask Georgia. They're the only one that stopped Georgia the whole season, to be honest. So, that's a problem. Now, Alabama's not playing well right now, but they're not playing in, Auburn is just lost at sea. I think it's a, 70-30 proposition that Alabama wins that game, but you just don't know. I think A&M, Texas is far more of a coin flip. So, it's understandable. I saw Cole Kubelik's tweet, probably talking to somebody in the league office about the percentage chance, maybe just looking at the ESPN analytics, that Georgia Alabama is the most likely matchup for the SEC championship. It makes a lot of sense. The least likely is Ole Miss Georgia. Ole Miss is not playing as well as they were. Alabama is not playing as well as they were. Texas A&M is not playing as well as they were. Georgia Tech is not playing as well as they were. Georgia is. that's where we're at right now. Is this Georgia team is rocketing on in there pretty well lately, and certainly the last 2 games. But I would say the last 6 games, Georgia has, I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. This is post Alabama. I believe they have won all those games by 10 points or more. Stick with me. Kentucky they did. Auburn they did. They did not beat Ole Miss by 10, but they won by 2 scores. And then they played Florida, which they should have won by 2 scores and did not. They beat Mississippi State in a blowout. They beat Texas. Is 25 points a blowout? I would not always call that a blowout, personally. That became a slow motion avalanche blowout, yes, but I don't know if I would describe that as a blowout. Was the I don't know. It was close. It was blowout adjacent, I'll tell you that. So you got that, and I think if you're a Georgia fan, you got the Tech game coming up. Georgia's going to be a double-digit favorite in that game. I don't know if it's going to be, mid-double digits like 15, or if it's going to be more like 11, but it will be a significant line. And Tech is just not playing well. I expect them to win Saturday night, but they just haven't played well for the bulk of the season, if we're being honest. I mean, the win over Clemson's 5-5. The win over Duke's 5-5. They won both those games on the last play of the game. They beat Colorado in spite of themselves. Colorado's 3-7. Wake Forest, they beat them by a point. There were some very questionable decisions that happened in that game on the ACC. They acknowledged it. It was rough. And then just this last week with Boston College. I mean, listen, Haynes King can't do everything, and it would be a monumental win for the Jackets to beat Georgia in Atlanta, whether or at Bobby Dodd or at the Dome. I mean, I don't see it. I think that there's a class of teams that Georgia would have a real knife fight with. Georgia Tech is in that universe, but not the way they're playing right now. Now, my caveat, and I'll write about this quite a bit this coming week, is that my caveat with that is Tech will play its best game of the year against Georgia, I think. Last year, I was certain of it. Last year, I don't know how they didn't lose to NC State 10 days before they played Georgia, or whatever it was, the Thursday before they played Georgia on a Saturday. They won that game. They looked horrible, but they won the game. And then they came to Athens and played their best possible game. You have to understand with the Jackets that you're going to get their best shot. They're going to get their best shot. I think the problem for Tech is they can't stop anybody. They can't stop anybody at all. They couldn't stop Boston College. That was a 1-9 Boston College team. The loss to NC State was rough. That was, at the beginning of this month. That was a rough look. They allowed 50 points. I mean, whatever it was, 49? Yeah, 49 points. That can't happen. So we're at the point here with that game where, if Tech was going to get Georgia, last year was a great opportunity. If Notre Dame was going to win the national championship, last year was a great opportunity. And that's why you got to yank things to your advantage while you can, because there's only so many opportunities in life to win championships and to have legacies and all of these things. And I think the good news about Tech Georgia is that you're going to see 2 of the premier quarterbacks playing in college football right now. I don't know that they'll both be in New York. They probably should be. But with the way Mendoza has played at Indiana and he has his moment, we don't know what that's going to be like. And we don't, as a Heisman voter, I used to say you can't win the Heisman until November. It might be you can't win it until December. That's the other thing for Georgia. There's reasons to play in the SEC championship game that really do benefit you. Without winning the SEC championship, you don't have a home. You're not going to play in the Rose Bowl. You can't play in the Sugar Bowl unless you're slotted there by seeding, which would mean you're the 7 seed or something like that. It's just not going to happen without some really weird stuff going on. But you need a home. So winning the SEC championship immediately gives you a home in the Sugar Bowl, and it gives you probably facing the 7 seed. We're not going to do all this crazy stuff like we did last year where nothing makes sense. And Georgia was the 2 facing the 5 in a quarterfinal like they did. That just, or whatever it was that Notre Dame was. So we got to stop that, and we fixed that. Now we really probably, I was one of the reporters that met with Greg Sankey before Texas, Georgia, and he's all these commissioners are smart. Greg Sankey's certainly very smart. He's right about this 1 through 16 or 1 through 12. It should just be who are the best 12 or 16, and just do that. And we're at a better place than we were, but we don't need any more of these situations where, like Alabama shouldn't be wondering if they're in the playoff if they're, 10-2. It's wrong. Like, we shouldn't be wondering if they're in there. They should be in there. Okay, now if they lose again, that's a different conversation. But, I don't need James Madison in over Alabama. I don't need them in over, I don't need to see Coastal Carolina. I don't need to see James Madison. I don't need to see, Liberty. It's just, what, so they can get their skulls kicked in? No. It's a disaster. We saw SMU get in the last year. They didn't deserve it. They shouldn't have been in there. Clemson earned their way in, but they were pretty rough, but they earned their way in. But we don't need SMU in this thing, y'all. We don't need the second place ACC team. We don't need James Madison. We don't need all these discussions have gotten out of control. And if this is going to be what should be a legitimate national championship, it needs to be a legitimate national championship. That's what we need. But I mean, Georgia doesn't need to worry about that. They could lose by 100 to Georgia Tech, and it's not going to make a difference. But it's there's Tech and Vanderbilt, and I would not argue right now that Tech should be in. I would not, but they may earn their way in. But I mean, does Vanderbilt deserve to be in right now? Have they earned it? I can't say they have. So this comes down to this Notre Dame, and we'll have the Notre Dame discussion some other time, but we should not be talking about the group of 5 champions should not be in this thing without legitimately being at the top. That's what I think. You tell me down below. We'll see you. Thanks for watching.